Hey there, guys. This is Cole. Welcome back to another movie review. Today's movie I'm going to be reviewing is the 1975 classic Jaws, directed by Steven Spielberg. And this movie celebrated its 50th anniversary this year, so I figured might as well take the time to review one of my favorite movies of all time, and I might possibly see this movie in theaters on Friday for the movie's 50th anniversary because here where I live, Jaws is being put back in theaters up here for its 50th anniversary this Friday where I live. So maybe I'll go see it this Friday if I have time, because this movie is a definite classic. And I will say, this movie has a really good cast. You got Roy Scheider as Chief Brody. You got Richard Dreyfuss as Matt Hooper. You got Robert Shaw as Quint. You got Lorraine Gary as Ellen Brody. You got Jay Mello as Sean Brody. You got Chris Ribello as Michael Brody. You got Marie Hamilton as Mayor Larry Vaughn. You got Lee Ferrero as Miss Kittner, and Jeffrey Voorhees as Alex Kittner, just to name some of the big members. So yeah, this movie's overall got a really good cast. So the plot of this movie is as follows. Police Chief Martin Brody of Amityville Island must battle a massive great white shark terrorizing the town's beaches. He's at the town's beaches, a threat the mayor tries to downplay for financial reasons. Brody then teams up with marine biologist Matt Hooper and gruff shark hunter Quint to hunt down the creature. So that's the basic plot synopsis of the movie. I mean, it's Jaws. I mean, everybody knows about this movie, even if they haven't seen it. That's how well known of an iconic movie it is. So, anyways, how was this movie received when it came out? Well, when Jaws was released on June 20th, 1979... When the movie was released on June 20th, 1975, the movie became a smash hit at the box office and was a very well-received movie from both critics and audiences, and is still highly regarded as one of the best movies of all time. This movie's success is what puts Steven Spielberg on the map as a director. Now, as for my reaction to the movie, yeah, I agree with the general consensus that Jaws is one of the best movies of all time. I mean, this movie invented the summer blockbuster as we know it today. Without this movie, you would not have had Star Wars, you would not have had Indiana Jones, you would not have had E.T. the Extraterrestrial, you would not have had Back to the Future, you would not have had Jurassic Park, you would not have had the Marvel Cinematic Universe, movies of that sort you would not have without this. You wouldn't have any of that without this movie. Anyways, so you guys might be wondering, well, how old was I when I first saw this movie and how was I introduced to it? Well, I first saw this movie when I was 10 years old back in 2013 when I found the DVD of it in one of those DVD binders that my mom had, and I've been a huge fan of this movie ever since then. Now, this movie is rated PG for violence, and now granted, let's be honest, if Jaws was made today, it would probably be either PG-13 or R-rated, because you gotta keep in mind, PG-13, the rating itself, that rating did not actually exist. Keep in mind, PG-13 did not exist until 1984. So this movie was made in 1975, and Steven Spielberg made this rated PG. That way, more people would show up, so the movie would be more successful. And I think it worked. And this is based on a book by Peter Benchley, and I have read the book. I do like, a lot of books, but Jaws, I thought the book was okay. The book was okay, but honestly, I think the movie's much better, and that's very rare for me to say, because most of the time, if there's a movie based on the book, I usually prefer the book, but this is one of the very few rare times where I prefer the movie. But anyways, without further ado, let's get into my review of this timeless classic movie. So the movie starts off where we have the iconic iconic theme by John Williams that's like, no. Well, okay. if you guys have seen the movie, or most of you have probably seen this movie, or if not, you've at least heard the theme, so I'm not going to try to intimidate it because I'm doing a terrible job at it, but it is an iconic meme, but like, you know, and then after that, the word Jaws appears on the screen, and then after that, the movie cuts to a girl by the name of Chrissy Watkins, who is basically sitting at a campfire she's basically sitting at a campfire on the beach with a few people out drinking and stuff like that. And then Chrissy Watkins is basically running. She's taking off her clothes to go skinny dip in the ocean. Now, like I said, keep in mind, this movie is rated PG, so there is only so much of that they can show, because otherwise, I guarantee if this movie had a lot more nudity, I guarantee it would have been rated R if it would have had more, but it's very limited in that department. But anyways, this movie didn't really need that, to be honest, but it didn't need a whole lot, to be honest, because I think the movie's story works without it. But anyways, getting back into the reviews, so Chrissy goes swimming and she is attacked by the shark, but what makes this scene work and what makes this scene effective is we see some of it from the shark's point of view, and when the shark attacks Chrissy, we do not see the shark at all. But it drags her underwater. Chrissy, she gets back up. She's screaming bloody murder. She's being dragged to the side, like she's being pulled sideways, and she's screaming for help, and her boyfriend is basically passed out on the beach. He isn't really, the noise is kind of drowned out, so he doesn't really hear it that much. But then Chrissy's yelling, like, please help me, and then eventually it stops. And then the next morning, we are introduced to our main character, Martin Brody, or Chief Brody, played by Roy Scheider, who basically, he goes to the beach and he finds Chrissy's decapitated arm in the sand, and the sand is decapitated arm in the sand, and basically it's covered in crabs, basically. And then, Martin Brody is just like shocked at what he sees, and then so because of that, Chief Brody is basically going to a store. He gets these signs up, and he gets these signs and stakes to basically put out signs that says beach closed, no swimming, and so basically Chief Brody, he basically tells one of his friends, I need you to bring these signs out there, beach is closed, no swimming and stuff like that. And one of Martin's or one of Chief Brody's friends tries to warn the mayor, but he doesn't listen. And then I like the part where, now granted, it's only very brief in the movie, but Chief Brody, he basically goes on like this, kind of like a small ferry, but like it allows cars to go on it and stuff like that. And Chief Brody is on the boat talking to the mayor, and then Chief Brody, and they're basically having a conversation, and the mayor says some stuff, but then Chief Brody says to him, I'm just reacting to what I was told. But then the mayor basically says to Chief Brody, it's all psychological. It's all psychological. You yell barracuda, not a big deal. You yell shark, we got a panic on our hands for the 4th of July. Basically telling him that, that is not something to mess around with. And, not long after that, we cut to the public beach where Alex Kittner basically asks his mom if he could go back in the water, and the mother says to him, let me see your hands. And she's like, Alex, your hands are starting to prune. And then he says, please, just a little longer. And then she's like, fine, just 10 more minutes. And then Alex says, thanks. And then I like the part where Chief Brody is sitting down and someone is basically talking to him, saying that, telling him something important. And then Chief Brody's distracted because he hears screaming, and obviously, but it's like a fun type of screaming. Basically, what I mean by that is, like, there's this guy who swims up underneath this girl and pushes her out the water, and she's, like, screaming but, like, laughing at the same time, so she's obviously having fun. But then Chief Brody's wife asks if he's okay, and then he says, yeah, I'm fine, honey. And again, we do not see the full creature, but basically what happens is that Alex is swimming on, like, one of those mat floaty things, like the ones where you lay on top of in the water, but then the shark swims up slowly, and then the shark basically attacks Alex and drags him under, but like, again, we only see a small little bit of the shark's body, like maybe the top of its, like, maybe like the top of its belly right here, like its little fins up, but like that's its dorsal fins that goes on the side of its body stick out the water briefly, but that's about it. And then one of the guys is like, did you see that? And then someone said, what? You know, because he notices the shape. And then Alex basically gets dragged underwater, and then, you know, blood comes up from the water, freaking out all the kids. And Martin Chief Brody, you know, all the kids are panicking. Then Martin Chief Brody is basically yelling at the top of his lungs, get out of the water. Come on, everyone, get out. But then basically the mat that Alex was on before he was attacked by the shark, it basically washes up to the beach, torn up, covered in blood. And Alex's mother says, Alex, you know, concerned for her son. But then not long after that, there is a town meeting by the mayor, and, you know, everyone is arguing whether it's a shark or not. One of them's like, oh, come on, we don't even know if there's a shark out there and stuff like that. But then I like the part where the mayor and everyone, they're in a courtroom, and then the mayor banes the gavel, settles everyone down, and the mayor says, any questions? And then I like the part where somebody says to him, is that $3,000 bounty on the shark in cash or check? And then everyone starts laughing in the courtroom, which I thought was kind of funny. But then basically someone says, I'm sorry, I don't think that was funny at all. But then basically the mayor makes everyone settle down by baiting the gavel, and he says, all right. That's private business between you, Fisherman, and Miss Kettner. Chief Brody then says, I just want to tell you what we're planning. We're going to put on a summer we're going to put on a summer patrol, extra deputies as soon as possible. But then someone asks him, are you going to close the beaches? But then Chief Brody says, yes, we are. But then everyone starts throwing a fit, and then but then the mayor says, only 24 hours, but then Chief Brody's like, I didn't agree to that. And then one of the persons is yelling, complaining, 24 hours is like 3 weeks. But then basically not long after that, we are introduced to the character Quint, played by Robert Shaw, who basically scratches nails on a chalkboard as loud as possible to get everyone's attention. But then Quint says to them, you all know me. I'll catch this big bird for you, but it ain't gonna be easy. Bad fish. Not like chasing bluegills and tummy cods. This shark swallow you whole. A little shaken, a little tenderizing, in you go. A little tenderizing, down you go. And we gotta do it quick. Gotta bring back the tourists. That'll put all of your business on a paying basis, but it's not gonna be pleasant. I value my neck a whole lot more than $3,000, Chief. I find him for 3, but I'll catch him and kill him for 10. You gotta make up your minds. Gonna stay alive and ante up, or you all gonna play it cheap? Be on the welfare the whole winter. I don't want no volunteers, no mates. There's too many captains on this island. $10,000 for me, myself. For that, you can get the head, the tail, the whole DAMN thing. But then the mayor basically thanks Quint, you know, thank you for your service and stuff like that. But then one of my favorite scenes in this movie is where it's at nighttime and these two fishermen are basically at a dock, and they basically have like a giant fish hook, but it's like a fish hook like I would say about twice the size of my hand. So it's a big fish hook, but they basically hook a pot roast turkey to it. And, you know, there's basically a metal chain attached to the hook, and they basically tied the metal chains around the dock, and then they throw it in the water. And I like the part where not long after he chucks it in, the guy's like, can we go home? And then not long after that, we cut to a scene where Chief Brody is basically fascinated just looking at a book talking about facts of sharks. But then not long after that, it cuts immediately back to the scene where the fisherman decided to use the bait to lure the shark. And as you can expect, the plan goes terribly wrong, as we don't see the shark, but the shark takes the bait and it pulls the chain that is attached to the dock that is attached to the hook. So it's basically taking the meat. It pulls the chain as fast as possible. It's going out, and the shark moves its body so hard that with the chain attached to the dock, it pulls the dock in half. knocking one of the fishermen into the water with a guy named Johnny, and the part where Johnny is in the water and he starts swimming back to shore, but like the shark's body is basically pushing a part of the dock towards him, like, the part that you can walk on, but it's like swimming towards him. The guy's like, "Come on, Johnny, swim." And then Johnny gets to the dock, and that's definitely a well done, intense scene. And we think the character's about to die, but he's basically pulled up to safety. And then part of the dock just floats back to the sand, and they're like, "Can we go home now?" But then the next day, not long after that, Chief Brody meets up with Matt Hooper, played by Richard Dreyfuss, who's a marine biologist. Him and Matt decide to investigate the death of the first victim in an autopsy room. And after Hooper investigates it, he says, "This was not a boat accident. It wasn't any propeller, it wasn't any coral reef, and it wasn't Jack the Ripper. It was a shark." But then not long after that, outside a bunch of fishermen are yelling, and they basically caught a tiger shark with blood on its mouth that they think was the shark responsible. But then Chief Brody and Hooper, they go outside, and they see that some fishermen caught a tiger shark. And basically, Hooper tries to talk to the mayor, convincing them to cut the shark open. That way they can see if it was really the shark responsible, but the mayor's not too keen on that idea, so they decide that they're going to do it at Hooper's house in the garage at nighttime, which the mayor does okay. And during the daytime, while all this is going on, Mrs. Kidder basically wears like a black gown. She walks up to Chief Brody. She says, "Brody," and then Brody says, "Yes." But then Miss Kidder basically slaps Chief Brody, and she's basically crying, and she says to him, "I just found out that the girl got killed here last week. And you knew it. You knew there was a shark out there. You knew it was dangerous, but you let people go swimming anyways. You knew all of those things. My boy is dead, and there's nothing you can do about it." And honestly, Miss Kidder, like, you really feel bad for her, because like she gives a good but I think that works because the actress's emotion really show. I think the actress does a great job, and you really bought the fact that she was grieving over the death of her son. Like, you really bought her performance for the little bit she was in the movie. But then later that night, Matt Hooper and Chief Brody, they're basically they're on a motorboat at nighttime with like a flashlight, and then they come across an empty boat, but like there's a hole in the side of it, and they're like, "Wait a minute, that's someone's boat that was up here," and stuff like that. But then Hooper decides to go investigate. He basically pulls out a 2-inch shark tooth, and he basically grabs a 2-inch shark tooth, but then he gets scared automatically because a dead body missing its eye basically floats in front of his face out from the boat, and he gets so scared that he basically drops the tooth in the water, drops his tooth and his knife, and he swims up to the surface, and it gets back on the boat that Brody is on. Then the next morning, they warn the mayor to close down the beach, and basically Hooper tells him that he pulled out a tooth the size of a shot glass out of the boat, so basically 2 inches. And the mayor basically asks for proof, saying, "Where is this tooth?" And then Hooper says, "I lost it," and stuff like that. And the mayor says, "I don't think you understand what you're trying to do here." But then I like the part where Hooper says to the mayor, "I think I'm familiar with the fact that you're going to ignore this particular problem until it swims up and bite you in the ASS." Like, I thought that scene was funny. But then the mayor says to Brody, if you fellas are concerned about the beaches, do whatever you have to do to keep them safe. But those beaches will do whatever you have to do to keep the tourists safe. But those beaches will be open for this weekend." Then there's a scene not long after that where there are these people at the beach, and there's a girl who panics and is screaming shark because she sees a shark fin, and pretty much everyone gets out the water. But then these people with spear guns basically go up to it, and then we find out that it was not a real shark. It was a prank. It was like these 2 people wearing black suits, and one of them had a shark fin on, and then one of the guys is pointing a spear, but then, you know, he decides to put the spear down, and then the other kid is pointing to the other kid, blaming it, saying, he made me do it, and stuff like that. But then, basically, a loudspeaker goes on and says, there's no shark, there's no shark up here. It was just a prank and stuff like that. And keep in mind, this ocean is connected to a pond. But then not long after that, there's a woman who actually sees a real great white shark, and the person is yelling, "Shark in the pond," but then Chief Brody basically runs to the rescue after hearing it. And then there's the part where Chief Brody's youngest son, like his 6-year-old son, is on the beach. And then there are these 3 kids, Michael Brody, the son of Chief Brody, the older son who's like 12, and 2 of his friends on a sailboat trying to tie a rope. But then one of the guys who is in a canoe next to them says, "Hole in the sheet, make it big." But then everyone is panicking. Like, the whole town is basically running towards him, yelling, "Shark in the pond," warning him to get out. But it's too late because the shark, because the great white shark, which is a big shark, it's 25 feet long. The shark, it basically tips over the sailboat that Michael Brody and his friends are on, as well as the guy who was in the canoe next to them. But then Michael Brody is in absolute shock because he sees a great white shark basically pull the guy in the canoe next to them under the water, but then he's basically screaming for death. And then basically we see a scene, we cut to a scene where we see the guy's severed leg just float to the bottom of the pond, and then blood comes up, freaking out everyone, and everyone is basically saying, "Get out of the water," and stuff like that. And the shark does not attack Michael, but it does swim by him, and Michael's in absolute shock with what he says. And then someone's yelling, "Does anybody have a gun?" And then Michael's mother comes to the beach, or Chief Brody's wife, and then they pull him in the shore. And then the mother's freaking out Michael, and then Brody says, checks his pulse, and he says he's in shock. And then Chief Brody runs, to get help. And then Chief Brody's youngest son, who's 6 years old, is crying over what happened and stuff like that. And then not long after that, at nighttime, Michael is in the hospital and stuff like that. And his mother checks in, and he's fine and stuff like that. But then, not long after that, Chief Brody, played by Roy Scheider, Matt Hooper, played by Richard Dreyfuss, and Quint, played by Robert Shaw. So basically, Chief Brody, Hooper, and Quint, they decide to go on Quint's boat called the Orca to basically kill the shark at sea so they can stop the shark from terrorizing Amity Island. But then I like the part of the movie where, of course, there's the iconic scene where Chief Brody is basically putting chum in the water for the shark to eat, and he says, "Why don't you come down here and chum some of this shit?" But then not long after that, the shark pops its head out the water briefly, then puts it back under, freaking out Brody, and then Brody backs out, and he says to Quint, "You're gonna need a bigger boat." But then Quint goes outside, and him, Chief Brody, and Hooper see that it's a big shark, and Hooper says it's a 20-footer, and then Quint says 25, 3 tons of him. But then basically they're getting ready to fight the shark, and then of course there's the scene where the shark, where Quint shoots a spear to the shark with a barrel tied to the rope, and the shark basically drags it underwater. And mind you, this spear they shot has a tracker, basically a tracker for the shark's location on it. Another aspect I really like about the movie is the iconic scene where Quint gives, the whole scene where Quint gives the speech, the iconic scene where Quint gives the speech about his experience on the U.S. Indianapolis is really good. And I like the part of the movie where during a speech of the USS Indianapolis, a ship that was around during World War II, so 30 years ago, which, granted, that's a lot longer now, but this movie came out in 1975, so at the time, 30 years ago, basically Quint tells the story to both of them, and then Quint says to Chief Brody, Japanese submarine slammed 2 torpedoes into her side, was coming back from the island of Letty just delivered the bomb. The Hiroshima bomb. 1,100 men went into the water. Vessel went down in 2 minutes. Didn't see the first shark for about half an hour. Tiger, 13-footer. Know how you know when you're in the water? You tell by looking from the dorsal to the tail. What we didn't know was our bomb mission has been secretly but what we didn't know is our bomb mission had been so secret no distress signal had been sent. They didn't even list us as overdue for a week. Very first light, Chief Sharks, Sub-Crusade, we inform ourselves into tight groups, kind of like old squares in a battle, like you see on a calendar, like the Battle of Water 2. Kind of like the Battle of Waterloo. The idea was shark comes to the nearest shark comes to the nearest man. The man starts pounding, hollering, screaming. Sometimes the shark goes away, sometimes he wouldn't go away. Sometimes that shark looks right into you, right into your eyes. You know a thing about a shark, he's got lifeless eyes. Black eyes like a doll's eyes. When he comes at you, seem to be living until he bites you, and those black eyes roll over wide. And then you hear that terrible high-pitched screaming. The ocean turns red. In spite of the pounding and hollering, they all come in. They rip you to pieces. You know that by the end of that first dawn, lost 100 men. I don't know how many sharks, maybe 1,000. I don't know how many men they averaged 6 an hour. On Thursday morning, I bumped into a friend of mine, Robinson from Cleveland, baseball player. Boatswain's mate. I thought he was asleep. Reached over to wake him up, bobbed up and down in the water like a top. Appended. Well, he had been bitten in half below the waist. Noon the 5th day, Mr. Hooper, a lockhead Ventura saw us. He swung in low and saw us. Young pilot, a lot younger than Mr. Hooper. He saw us and came in low. 3 hours later, a fat PBY comes down and starts to pick us up. That was the time I was the most frightened, waiting for my turn. I will never wear a life jacket again. 1,100 men went into the water. 316 men come out. The shark took the rest. On June 29th, 1945. Anyway, we delivered the bomb. So that's basically the whole speech that he gives. And what I really like about this scene is like you get the sense of dread that, you know, based on the story that he's telling these characters, like you get the sense of dread that these characters are thinking, you know, like when Chief Brody and Matt Hooper hear this story, like they're looking at each other in disbelief, but like in a way where they're like, wow, this is serious. And then I like the scene not long after that where Hooper, Chief Brody, and Quint, they basically start to sing, "Show me the way to go home. I'm tired and I want to go to bed," and stuff like that. But then, basically, the barrel attached to the shark with the track, basically, there's the shark with the barrel attached to it with the tracker, and so because of that, the shark rams into the boat, interrupting them, and then it gets bad to the point to where the power goes out, you know, the power in the inside of the boat goes out, making everyone go out on deck. And then I like the scene when Hooper is holding a rope, and then the shark jumps, and then the shark's head pops out of the water, scaring Hooper, making him let go of the rope, but he gets like a rope burn against his hand. Then Chief Brody decides to call for help, but Quint, for whatever reason, decides to smash the phone. But then Chief Brody, this makes him furious, and he's yelling, "That's great! That's just great! Now what are we supposed to do?" But then, you know, Hooper's like, "Oh, boys, I think he's back for his afternoon feeding." Then basically what happens, then a spear tied to a barrel is shot. the shark pulls it off the boat and swims away fast. And Chief Brody then shoots the shark with a revolver. And then Chief Brody shoots the shark with a revolver a few times. I mean, it causes it to bleed, but it doesn't kill the shark. And then, not long after that, Quint shoots a spear into the shark's chin, attached to the rope. And so obviously, Quint, he shoots a spear at the shark's neck. Well, basically, its chin, but the shark is swimming so hard that it's pulling the boat backwards. And it gets so bad to the point where water is starting to flood in. So to stop it, Quint basically has to cut it off with a machete, and he does it quickly. Now, let's get to the best part of the movie, the finale, the last 10 minutes. This is the big finale of the movie that everyone's been waiting for, where Hooper gets inside a shark cage and puts on a scuba suit, and he gets a spear so he can stab and kill the shark. I like the scene where the intense music is playing, very iconic theme by John Williams, where the shark swims out of sight, but then Hooper has the spear, in his hands, holding a spear with two hands, ready to kill the shark. But then the shark, after it swims out of sight, it comes behind him, and the shark basically rams the cage, knocking the spear out of Hooper's hand, and Hooper sees that it's way at the bottom, and then the shark comes back, and the shark's trying to break the cage open, freaking out Hooper. And then once the shark's head is in the cage, Hooper stabs the shark's nose with a knife, making it bleed a little bit. And then the shark goes back. And the shark is still trying to get Hooper, but the smart thing about the cage that he's in, the cage that Hooper is in, the top lid can open up easily like a door. So because of that, Hooper just easily pushes that open, swims out of it, and the shark does not even notice that. The shark does not even notice that Hooper escaped and is still trying to attack the cage, but the cage is tied to the boat, which is tied to the metal chain holding it. And so they're trying to reel it up, and then Chief Brody's like, come on, reel it up quick. And then the shark's on top of the cage, thrashing it, and then eventually the shark gets off the cage, and then basically part of the lever part of the stand attached to the stick that was holding the lever basically snaps and falls down. And then the shark swims away, but then they basically have to attach it to something. So then Quint basically reels it up as fast as he can. And keep in mind, when the shark was thrashing on the cage, the boat was tipping sideways a little bit, but as soon as it got off, the boat was fine. And then Quint ties it to the side, and he reels up the cage to basically see the cage destroyed and empty. So they think that the shark got Hooper, but that's obviously not the case. Then, of course, there is the iconic scene where, the great white shark is swimming, and then the shark opens up its jaws, and then the shark's head lands on top of the boat, but the shark destroys some of the back of the boat, and then Quint is about to fall down, but Chief Brody's holding him, trying to have Quint, survive, but he accidentally slips out of Chief Brody's hand, and then Quint is falling down the boat, and Quint is, he's kicking at the shark, he's trying to kick it in the nose, to basically get away from the shark, but it doesn't work, and then Quint's legs fall inside the shark's mouth, and then the shark crunches down on him, and then Quint is basically screaming bloody murder, and he's, trying to get the shark off of him, Quint even takes his machete, he's stabbing the shark in the side of the face a little bit, trying to get it off, and then the shark crunches down harder until Quint dies and blood comes out his mouth, and then the shark drags him under the water. Then on the sinking boat, Chief Brody grabs a fire extinguisher when the shark shows up, and he tries to smash the shark on the nose, which it does work successfully, but then he tries it a second time, and he accidentally throws it in the shark's mouth, and then the shark goes back underwater, but then Chief Brody climbs on top of the boat because the boat has a long stand, and Chief Brody is ready with his gun and a spear, but then, and then Chief Brody is on the side of the, he's on the boat with the long stand, up in the air, and then the shark pops out of the water, and Chief Brody is trying to kill the shark, he tries to stab it with a spear, 2 to 3 times, but then the third time, the shark basically knocks the spear out his hand and pulls it underwater. And then I like the part where Chief Brody's like, all right, come on, where's the tank? Come on, blow up. But then we see a wide view of the shark with flesh stuck in its gums and as well as the tank. And then Chief Brody, you know, he's trying to shoot the shark. He tries to shoot the shark 3 times. And he says, and after the 3rd time, he's like, blow up. And then he shoots it 1 more time. And on the 5th time, he says, smile, you son of a B word. And then he basically pulls the trigger. And then he pulls the trigger, hits the fire extinguisher. And then boom, the shark explodes open and blood and chunks of flesh fall in the air. And then Chief Brody is happy, smiling. And then we cut to the scene where the shark is sinking to the bottom of the ocean. And the music makes it work really well. And then not long after that, Hooper swims up to the surface, and Chief Brody is surprised to see Hooper alive, and then you know, Hooper is asking Chief Brody if Quint made it, and then Brody says no, but then Hooper and him are smiling, and then he says, now what? But then not long after that, him and Chief Brody get these floorboards attached to 2 barrels, and they put them together, and they use them to swim back to shore. And as they swim back to the shore, Chief Brody says, what day is it? Hooper then says, it's Tuesday, I think. Then Brody says, I think the tide is with us. And then Hooper says, keep kicking. And then I like the part where Chief Brody says to him, I used to hate the water. Then Hooper says, I can't imagine why, but obviously sarcastically. And then the movie ends. So yeah. This was a long review, but at the end of the day, I had to give this movie a long, in-depth review, as Jaws is one of my favorite movies of all time, like it is with everyone else, and I am going to give Jaws, obviously, a 10 out of 10. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching my review, and next up, I will attempt to watch the Minecraft movie, which I've heard nothing but awful things about, to review it, and then as soon as I'm done with that movie, we will finally get back to the Jurassic Park reviews. But until then, we'll catch you guys later. Bye-bye.